So my name is Michiel Van Oudheusden. I'm a Marie Curie fellow at the University of Cambridge, working with Jennifer Gabri. And so what I'd like to address is grassroots citizen science. Say something about scale and sustainability of grassroots citizen science. I think it might be useful to actually distinguish between so some of citizen science understood as being more contributory, whereby citizens work or collaborate with professional scientists. But there's also obviously these grassroots movements who organize themselves in do it themselves or do it ourselves fashion. So they operate outside of the formal processes, the formal institutions, and so on. But they can still have a very big impact on the formal institutions. So this could be policy making, or this could be the scientific communities, it could be media, it could be educational organizations, and so on. And so this is the project I'm working on, Grassroots Citizen Science for Global Data Environments. Some of the issues I'm looking at through these citizen science groups, which I'm studying, is air pollution, climate change, and now I'd also like to say something very briefly about disease outbreaks, considering that this is such a timely topic, right? But so what they share is that these are data-led initiatives, which they emanate from the bottom up, right? So it's citizens organizing themselves in collectives and communities. So they're not initiated by formal institutions, by which I mean, this could be the policymakers or the professional science communities. And I'm looking at 3 regions. I'll get to these in a moment. There's East Asia, and more specifically Japan, Western Europe, and then Central Africa. So in Japan, I've done quite a lot of work on Japan recently. Some of you may have heard of Safecast, for instance. It's an independent volunteer organization. And they have been measuring ever since the Fukushima disaster in 2011. They began measuring radiation pollution in the environment, and they've had quite, I could say, an impact on the international level, perhaps less so in Japan. But they were one of many citizen science initiatives which emerged. So they developed their own devices, and they sought to empower citizens with these tools and techniques to get some sense of, for instance, how radiation is spreading in the environment. What are the implications, for instance, for where to move, where to go, that type of thing, and they created data maps, right, which are accessible online, and anyone can participate in this. So it's a very brief introduction to Safecast. In Belgium, you see here on the bottom right-hand corner, you see a picture of the Ring Road in Antwerp, so in the north of the country, which is congested, right? There's a lot of traffic and a lot of air pollution. So there's a citizen science movement called Curious Noses, which emerged a couple of years ago, and they began measuring nitrogen dioxide, right, in a very, very simple way. They were able to manage, or they were able to mobilize 20,000 citizens in Flanders, in the northern region of Belgium. So this has been a massive success. And it grew from the bottom up. So it was initiated by activists who later became citizen scientists. And that's actually quite interesting to see how they transformed from activists into citizen scientists. But I'll come back to that in a moment. I won't say much about, actually I won't say anything about Central Africa. I don't think I have the time, but there's things going on which I will look at later in my project. So these are some of the questions I'm hoping to answer. So one is, how do citizens mobilize data devices and technologies to tackle environmental threats, such as air pollution, for instance? And then how do the formal institutions respond to these data practices and these citizen-driven movements? Why? Because I think ultimately, if we want to organize, initiate environmental governments, we're going to have to find ways to work together. Maybe reluctantly, but either way, I mean, there's no way out of it. And you see this very clearly with Safecast. So I'll give you an example here. So this is from field work. So in the picture on the right, you see one of the members of Safecast. His name is Asby Brown. And he was invited to an IAEA meeting, so a meeting by the International Atomic Energy Agency in Vienna in 2014, where he presented Safecast to a very, very critical audience, so representatives of various nation states. I mean, it was quite a feat for him to get there already, right? To be invited to that space. And he explained what they were doing, what Safecast was doing, right? They had actually filled an information vacuum right after the Fukushima disaster, because there was not sufficient information. The Japanese, in particular, they were worried that they were getting wrong information, or even, fake news, I suppose is the word that's in vogue now. The monitoring systems, the government didn't know how to mobilize these properly and actually use those data and so on. So it was just one big mess. And I think that the Japanese government has actually acknowledged that in reports that appeared after the disaster. So what Safecast was really fill that void, and using their own data, using their own technologies, and their own getting self-organized, really. And so what's interesting to see is that in a draft report, for instance, in 2014, by the IAEA, there's this recognition of this acknowledgement of the institution that empowerment of the public is not necessarily a negative development. So in some way they feel threatened, I would say, if just reading this. So the genie's out of the bottom. The genie's then citizen science, or this form of citizen science. And we have to accept that that citizens will organize themselves and do things whether we like it or not. I mean, and I'm speaking as from their perspective, the perspective of a formal institution. So that's interesting how that's developing.
Thank you.
I think it's just important to highlight that all of this is a two-way process. So the formal institutions, organizations like the IAEA, they have actually bought these counters, the Geiger counters from organizations like Safecast, and then the citizen scientists, they also accommodate, like, let's say, the dominant discourses, for instance, by dissociating from regular activists